We'll start with Board Member Wharton, followed by Board Member Johnston.
Yeah, so do we have anybody from FedEx that we've talked to about, and how do they feel about being included? Do they care?
I have not had an opportunity to reach out to FedEx just with timing and workload, but I can definitely do that over the next week. I've heard, I don't know if Lara Fritz has any, do you know if they're expanding or have any plans?
Okay. Are they aware that they're like, that they're being, that site's being considered for inclusion? Should we talk to them before we?
No, they're probably not aware, and we can certainly speak to them, but being included in the survey area does not necessarily present a negative connotation as in traditional or older project areas where you had a finding of blight. That would be the condition that some property owners had qualms about, but whereas this doesn't affect them and actually just provides them additional opportunities, I wouldn't anticipate that they would be opposed to it.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Johnston.
Sure. So the property east of F2 right now, is that airport property?
I believe some of it is. The airport definitely, this line goes up to their future kind of anticipated expansion area, so.
I'm just wondering, because I know you did quite an outreach process beforehand in setting up the boundaries. Are there other properties that may come out of the woodwork, so to speak, and say, well, why not us as well, that we're not included, we want to keep, you can see how this might keep going and going, I don't know.
Yeah, we definitely wouldn't want to go east of the eastern expansion boundary we have here, because that is into the airport's planned area. I think that's why we incorporated all of these parcels that you see here. I suppose there could be potential for property owners to the south in the International Center to be interested in the future.
Are their utilities fairly set though down there? They wouldn't necessarily need the increment?
With the original project area, that was kind of why the International Center wasn't included, is that was already under development and accounted for.
Okay. Yeah, that was my only concern, is that are there other properties that may now come forward again, and we have this discussion over and over again, so to speak, so. Okay.
Right.
Thank you, and I echo Councilmember Wharton's question about making sure that FedEx is just aware if they do have any input or anything.
We can certainly reach out to them and follow up with that.
Thank you.
Board Member Mendenhall.
Thank you. I wonder about the F1, F2 inclusion, because it is part of the existing development in that area. And if you have thoughts on that, I want to say on the record that I would be opposed to inclusion of existing International Center development parcels, that would be a substantive change to the purpose of the CRA, and I wonder if the inclusion of that F1 parcel is already breaching a substantive change.
Yeah, I believe we did mention that in the staff memo, especially the F1 parcel does have existing development on it, and the rest of this CRA for the Northwest Quadrant is
developed,
completely undeveloped, so that is a bit of a deviation from the other parcels that are included.
Has Katie Lewis had any opinion about this?
Not on the specific justification for the properties. Our thought was, while the FedEx property, half of it is developed, the other half is still available for expansion. And so
they
that was
individual, they're separate parcels.
They are.
And so that was a consideration, that we didn't want to end up here if for some reason either FedEx wanted to expand and had issues that related to the site conditions, and or they sold the property to a property owner who then wanted to come in and be included. So while that property is developed, we thought it made sense to at least include it as consideration, and if nothing else, if the board wanted to direct staff to keep the lines clean and have a nice natural deviation of where the project area ended, that would potentially prevent these issues from coming up again in the future. As you're looking at developing the area over 20 to 40 years, it's hard to predict what's going to happen during that time.
And yet, it's difficult to say that the inclusion of F1 wouldn't lead one to believe that that parcel directly south of F1 wouldn't also fit. It looks like you can't even, I mean, I've worked out there. I know there's roadways, but you can't distinguish the difference between F1 and the property south of it. They're both fully developed properties, so.
And I think one of the deciding factors for us to include that in the proposed areas, F2 is the undeveloped parcel, and that's to the east of the developed one. So FedEx could potentially expand or sell that off for development, and the new owner could come back wanting a boundary amendment in the future. But we could always take F1 out and just have it jog over and down to include F2.
I don't know that I'm asking for that yet. I guess I wanted to raise it for discussion, consideration, that that's our one parcel now that has a building on it, and this whole CRA is undeveloped. So we're getting into a new discussion here where it may be harder for us to say no to an abutting property owner that has a development on it that would like the advantages of inclusion in the CRA. And there's other RDA tools, some that we just very recently developed, that if FedEx wanted to invest, let's say more than $10 million in their property, we have opportunities to bring significant RDA complement to those kind of projects, such as this area might be able to afford space for growth.
Yeah, for us, we understand and agree with everything you've said, which is why the initial conversation of not including the International Center. But we're also fans of straight lines, and it makes it a lot easier over time as properties sell and redevelop, and as you're looking at long, development timeframes of 20 to 40 years. We suspect it'd probably solve us a lot more problems if we just had the clean lines now rather than piecemeal them out. But
I can do that today. I can do that. But let me be clear that
Sure.
I am not interested in coming back with developed property owners in this area saying, what about us too?
Yes.
This is it.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you for your comments, Board Member Mendenhall. Anybody else?
Oh, I was just going to say that I'm comfortable with F2 if that's really what it is over there that I can't see. Just because, Aaron, there's no other property that really has the land to help develop in that or expand, and F2 is the only one in that. That's the only one with that parcel, right, that we've included with that extra land for that reason alone. So I'm comfortable moving forward with it.
Thank you, Board Member Rogers. I'd also like to welcome Board Member Charlie Luke to the meeting. Those comments being mentioned, where do we go from here, Board? Do you guys want to move forward with F1, the inclusion of F1? Board Member Wharton?
So is the inclusion, or the vote today is just to include it in the survey,
Update,
right?
yes.
Okay.
I was going to say, just to clarify, that the board's action today isn't the final action. I think Tammy mentioned it earlier, that it's the final action would be next month. So
Great. So do you need straw poll or anything from us? We're good to go?
We need actually adoption of the resolution authorizing these survey boundaries, and then policy direction, since we would like to turn this plan around quickly based on the public comment, direction on which parcels you ultimately want included.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion.
Please, Board Member Mendenhall.
I move that the board approve a resolution initiating an amendment to the survey area boundaries as stated, with the inclusion of parcels F1 and F2. Is that sufficient?
All right, we have a motion by Board Member Mendenhall and a second by Board Vice Chair Fowler. Is there any discussion? All right, I'll roll call this one. Board Member Rogers, or Board Member Johnston? Excuse me.
No offense. Yes.
Wharton?
Yes.
Mendenhall?
Yes.
Fowler?
Yes.
I'm a yes.
Yes.
All right, that carries unanimously. Thank you, Danny, for joining us. And I think Tammy is at the table for item C3. Are you going to stick around, Danny, as well?
I'll be here all night.
Okay. All right, so item C3 is real property disposition proceeds policy. And just by way of reminder, board, we had a discussion back in October with a former iteration of this board where the board chair at the time, Lisa Adams, asked staff to go through potential other options, and this item is back before us today. So I will go ahead and toss this to RDA staff to update us.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Having slight technical difficulty, but I'll begin. So it was during the October 10th meeting that we initially brought the real property disposition proceeds policy as the recommended version by administrative staff to the board, and this is a follow-up to that discussion. The draft policy sets forth guidelines to establish a holding account actually for each project area and also a holding account for the citywide housing fund. So proceeds from the sale of any RDA-owned real property shall be deposited into these holding accounts. Here it is, it's up. Let me view. Let's see. Full screen.
This
So-
is attachment B in your packet, by the way.
Yes. So based on the source of, the acquisition source of funds, so if this example here is in Depot District, so for this property, the Program Income Fund and Depot District Project Area Fund was used to purchase the property for project area development. So the disposition holding account would be for the Depot District. And then the policy also sets forth guidelines to guide RDA staff as we develop our proposed budget. So it provides guidelines for how RDA staff will prioritize those funds. So the first priority is project area development within the Depot District project area for this example. Second priority would be priority projects in other project areas or seed funds for a project area that's new or just being created. And then a third option would be the revolving loan fund. So that's kind of the example for our project area holding accounts. Then we also have the citywide housing fund. So if citywide housing funds were used to purchase a property for affordable housing development, the holding account would be the citywide housing fund. And then the guidelines RDA staff would use to reprioritize those funds in the budget would be for future affordable housing. And the thought process behind this model was that it helps keep tax increment generated from a project area within that project area as funds are turned over. And it also keeps citywide housing funds regenerating for more affordable housing. That being said, I believe in your packet, City Council staff had prepared some other policy options that could be provided. For example, you could put all of the funds in PIF or in citywide housing, or there was a third option, I believe. Oh, just like a main surplus holding account, such as what the city does. So we're open to questions or feedback, future direction.
I would actually like to request that we have Ben Ludke from the City Council office as well. Would you be willing to go through those additional options that you've prepared?
Yeah, we can run through those quickly. And just an important point is not all RDA dollars are the same. Dollar of tax increment is different than the dollar after a sale because the tax increment used to, say, purchase land has fulfilled the statutory requirement for that tax increment dollar. Once that sale is finished and the proceeds come back to the RDA, that dollar is no longer bound by the tax increment statutory requirements. So it's more flexible money is the point.
Mm-hmm.
The three options in the staff memo, and these are not comprehensive, there are certainly other options. These are just three that came to staff's mind. The first one is a centralized surplus land account, and this would mirror what the city does in CIP, where all sales go into the surplus land fund, and they sit there until the city wants to purchase a piece of land, but it also helps pay for some due diligence when the city is looking at buying property. And some of the pros and cons, the pros would be that it increases flexibility because you can spend that money in any project area. It's not bound to the project area where the tax increment was generated. It's also much simpler to have one account than to have multiple accounts, one for each project area. And it's easier to save for large projects because you're pooling all of the proceeds into this one account. But on the flip side, the cons would be it's possible that the dollars from project areas don't go back to the original project area where the tax increment was generated. And so there might be some equity issues there. Another con is this would be a new account, and so the board might need to come up with policies and guidelines about how to spend the money in this surplus land account, so that's additional work that would be needed.
Ben, can you talk to me about what would be different between this account and, say, program income fund?
So there's actually a lot of similarities in the flexibility of the funds, and that's actually why we have the third option is to just directly place the proceeds into program income fund, because functionally the money is just as flexible.
I would say that, just to add, just from the general fund perspective and the experience of the general fund, there does tend to be, I don't know if there's a technical term for it, but maybe like an emotional allegiance to reusing property funds on property. So there's nothing that legally binds the city for using surplus land account money on only land, but that tends to be what the city uses it for because that's sort of been the historical practice. So there's sort of like the organizational momentum that I think just keeps that practice in place. So.
Okay, thank you. So number 2?
So number 2 is dedicating proceeds to the citywide housing fund. And the citywide housing fund is flexible in that you can spend the money citywide. It doesn't have to be within an RDA project area, but it would be limited to the 80% of area median income for affordable housing projects. And it has similar pros to the first approach, where it's centralized in this one account. It's easier to save money for the larger projects and it's easier to administer just one account. And then we touched on the third option, which is placing the proceeds directly into the program income fund, which has similar pros and cons.
Okay, board members, any thoughts? Board member Fowler.
And I just put a cough drop in, sorry, but so Tammy, with the you have proposed under that sort of first column, the first example number 2, when we're getting the funds from the program area, and those 3 priorities, if we go down to then how we're going to budget the proceeds, sorry, I'm looking for my own so I can look at it close up, but and so for example, the project area development is priority number 1, and then you have number 2 and number 3. Does this mean if we're in a project area and we say, well, there's really nothing more we need here in this project area, then we go to number 2, and then if number 2 is like, okay, maybe there's nothing that we're going to, everything is perfect, and so now we're just going to put it into our loan fund? Is that kind of how those priorities work?
Right, they're in order of priority, so the intention would be first and foremost to keep those funds within the project area that generated them, but Ben's exactly correct. Once they've been used once, they're flexible and you can use them in other project areas. That being said, I think it was Director Penfold, when he was still on the board, mentioned that he specifically thought that project area funds generated from an area should be prioritized for that area. So that was kind of the direction we were basing our proposal off of. That being said, there's new members of the board, and the board as a whole might choose to go into a different direction, but we definitely want to keep the funds through this proposal within the project area. And if there were other priorities that staff and the board saw fit in other project areas, or if we needed seed money, we could then look at allocating funds that way. And yes, in a perfect world, which probably would never happen, we could look at allocating to the loan fund. And it's really just direction for staff to bring back our budget proposal to you. Everything, of course, is subject to board approval as far as the budget goes.
No, I appreciate the effort of that, kind of addressing equity and potential inequities in reusing those proceeds and what that could look like from a public level, right? And the perception that could create if there were seemingly inequities, right? But I do also see some concerns with saving up, like Ben has brought up. So how would this proposal kind of address some of that, of multiple accounts, which seems a little worrisome? I'm not an accountant, so I just start to have anxiety with that. But then also kind of this idea of saving up for a bigger purchase or something along those lines if we have this. Is there a way to address, kind of combine all of those concerns somehow?
I think not being able to speak for the accounting department, I don't think having multiple accounts is that problematic.
I think we're going to big budget.
That's what we've traditionally done, and in fact, as part of the RDA revamping our budget, we've scaled back significantly the number of accounts we have, and so that's been helpful. But as far as saving up for larger projects, I think as Tammy mentioned, this allows you the flexibility to do both and adjust your priorities as the funds come in. One point of clarification to make that the statute is very clear that once you spend funds on housing, they are forever and always dedicated to housing. And so I would lend a word of caution to how much you put directly to housing, because that does potentially limit your flexibility in the future if you did want to start using those funds for something else. I would also echo Tammy's comments that while the statute is not necessarily clear that the flexibility you have after you spend the funds once, I think the priority has always been to continue to spend those funds to the extent possible within the project area by which they are pooled. And so what you have in front of you is that flexibility to do both, that as those funds do come back, you can take a look at that in terms of where are we at with the project area versus where are we looking in the future, and or is there a priority of saving up for a larger chunk of money. And what we've presented here kind of gives you the flexibility across all of those to kind of make sure that as those come in, you can adjust your priorities and allocations accordingly. So.
Just to be clear, I guess a point of clarification, at the proposed disposition roadmap here, when we put the proceeds from a project area into a holding account for each project area, I assume that holding account doesn't yet exist, right? So we would have to set that up for each project area?
I believe, I can turn to Mike here, but I think those holding accounts exist now. Is that, no?
No.
So then, yes, we'd have to set those
So the
up, but-
administrative concern would be the same based on your point, right, Ben?
Say again?
So you brought up the pros and the cons of the three options you laid out, and one of the cons was, the administrative time and effort to create the holding account. So I guess that would be a concern here as well, right, with all of our project areas?
Yes, and it would also be the tracking over time. So if we had a request from the board, what is the current balance of all of the funds for this project area or for all RDA project areas? They're just additional accounts for us to keep track of as well.
Jennifer Bruno?
That said, I think that there's been significant improvement over the last 2 years or so as the finance department kind of continues to work with the RDA staff in being able to quickly pull up those accounts. So I think that what was a concern maybe a year ago, I think will be less of a concern the more automated that kind of financial reporting gets.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
I have one.
Board Member Rogers, please.
I guess mine is just kind of an interesting in the weeds question. When we look at these different options that our staff has placed before us, if you look at the wording in the cons, it says proceeds may not be reinvested into the project area where the tax increment was originally generated. My question is, so if that money is taken and used in another area and then for reinvested and then that property is sold, or vice versa, that money how are you going to be able to track that money so it doesn't start to get washed and then start being broken down into these different areas? Does that make sense?
Yes.
So a point of clarification, the program income fund, just for ease, we are proposing not to have a holding account for PIF. So we'd simply keep track of it by the acquisition source. So in the example in the chart provided, that property was purchased with both PIF and Depot District funds, but it would go back into the Depot District account, which I know is a little not as clean as we would like it, but we just felt that was easier because properties usually appreciate over time, so then we'd have to keep track of what percentage of funds came from PIF and what came from the project area. So it's simply the source of acquisition funds is the account, the project area account, holding account that it would be dropped into.
So in essence, it would just still create more work for staff with one of these options. Is that correct?
I don't think it would be a significant amount of work. I think it would just be a matter of being able to track where they were originally drawn from, and then you would just use that project area fund to put them right back into that fund.
Okay, and then a follow-up question to this is that where is the Economic Development Department as well as RDA? Where would you like to see these funds go?
I think as we've laid out, I think the first priority should always be right back in the project area by which they're from. That's kind of the charge of the RDA, is to continue to put the funds back into the project area and continue to build the tax base. As we've mentioned, eventually you get to either the end of the project area or you're looking at where you have other needs. And this allows you that ability to say, okay, we've done what we need to do. Now we can start putting these funds into other programs. It also allows you to do that at any time if you have another project or something that you want to build up for. And then the bottom line is you have your revolving loan fund or your PIF account that gives you the maximum flexibility to do anything across all project areas. And so for us, this is the cleanest way to number one, separate between what, once it's in housing, it stays in housing, and those allocations should probably be done initially as part of our annual budget, so that you're meeting the statutory requirements as well as the policies and the preference of the board and the mayor of how much we want to put towards housing. But then this also keeps that line clear between where you want to maximize your reinvestment in project areas, where you want to keep your housing funds, while still maintaining the highest amount of flexibility throughout the entire process to
Well,
adjust your priorities.
I guess, Danny, this is where I'm struggling, right, is with the policy question is, whereas North Temple, we really don't own much property there, right? Whereas in the Depot District or the Granary District, we own a lot of property, right? And in order to build that catalytic project for North Temple or these areas that have been struggling, that's where I'm having a dilemma, is trying to figure out. To me, it makes a lot of sense that we're gonna have a catalytic project and start off these project areas with something going and rolling instead of waiting for something to build up. So that's where I'm struggling. So I appreciate your input.
So, Board Member Rogers, when it comes to the policy as laid out, do you have recommendations or things that you'd like to see modified?
Not to be modified. I guess I'm struggling personally with the policy question of where I can see advantageous for us to be able to have fluidity with this money, that we can say, you know, North Temple or the Granary is really struggling. Let's take the CBD money and dump it and get something moving. So for me, I mean, I understand that we've been doing things for so many years, and you know, we're tired of it apparently. So I want to see something change. And for me, I look at North Temple, and we have new development going in, but most of it's outside of the area, and I would just love to see a catalytic project just start. And I feel like this is the way that we can do that in these areas that are drowning.
Andrew, Board Member Johnston.
I agree. I like the recommendation of example number one. The reason is because from an accounting perspective, I understand that you may talk a little bit about multiple accounts, but it does clarify exactly where the money was, where it is, and it's easier to track, I think, long term. It also gives flexibility, because example number two is you go into housing, it stays in housing, period. At least in the first one, James, I agree with you. You have the ability to prioritize projects in that particular area or use it towards a priority project in another area. There's flexibility inherent in that, and we can track exactly where we took the money from. If we decide to take money and put it into North Temple from somewhere else, we know where it came from. We know maybe where there's a ledger in our heads or on paper that says, well, we need to get some money back to that area again because they put it in. The reality, though, is that CBD pays for everything. Let's be clear here. None of our project areas fund themselves for anything we do. So this is an accounting thing for me, just saying, for an accounting perspective, I like individual accounts that have some flexibility that we can track very easily across time.
Jennifer Bruno, do you have something to add?
I was going to say, I think if the board wanted to make it a priority to fund a catalytic project in the North Temple project area, I think you could absolutely still do that, and it wouldn't necessarily be limited to funds only from the sale of property. I think anytime you talk about the budget, whether it's capital funds or anything, you can look at the program income fund or the revolving loan fund and decide, you know, of all your policy priorities, where does it make sense to spend those dollars? So I think that that's a conversation that you can still have.
Board Member Fowler.
And again, I don't want to reiterate things too much, but again, these are simply a guiding principle for RDA to say, for example, if we had the proceeds and it came from one area and you said, well, here's some things that could be done in this area, although this area is thriving, but priority number two may be this. That still comes down to us in saying, let's go with priority number two, where we're going to have that catalytic project over in North Temple or something along those lines, correct? This is more of sort of how to make it easier on you to create a budget for us to look at. Is that, in layman's terms, accurate?
Yes.
And what does the policy say now?
We don't have a policy now.
So I think what I'm hearing is the discussions whether we should keep each project area having its own holding account, or maybe creating a combined holding account. Is that what I'm hearing the options are?
So I think that's exactly what we're hearing, and it sounds like maybe we need to, if that's what we agree upon today, we might consider having a shared surplus land account that we then create policy around. I don't know if that's for disposition, yeah, so we could hold the funds in one account, come back to it, and create policy at a later board meeting if we wanted. Do you? Just fodder. Does somebody have a motion? Are we prepared to move in that direction yet?
You gonna do it, James? All right. Well, I would make a motion that we create individual holding accounts within project areas. Simple as that.
May I expand on your motion?
Friendly amendment?
Yes, a friendly amendment. May I amend that we just approve the property disposition policy as it is presented as is, where we would have both what is up on the screen right now. So the policy as is and has been presented.
Sure.
So it's been moved by Board Member Johnston and Board Member Fowler to move forward as suggested by the RDA staff. Is there a second? I guess.
Just,
Can
I think it's actually, I think the motion has to come from Board Member Fowler.
Okay.
Because even though it was a friendly amendment, it was still an amendment. Is
All
that
right.
Okay. All right. Sorry.
All right. In that case, I have a motion by Board Member Fowler to move forward as laid out by staff, as suggested by RDA staff. Is there a second? By Johnston.
Yes.
Okay. Any further discussion on this item? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
That motion carries.
Thanks, Tammy.
Thanks.
All right, moving along. We are now at item C4, project area creation priorities. At the table, we have RDA COO Danny Waltz and Court Utley. I don't see Court here
Court
today.
is out sick today, and so please forgive me if I don't sound as good as he does in doing this presentation. What you have before you is a point of discussion that we wanted to come and have with the Board of Directors. You've been involved in the process for creation of the State Street, 9 Line, and Northwest Quadrant project areas. As we are wrapping those up in their various forms of the CRA plan and getting ready to present those to our taxing entity partners for discussion and potential participation, there have been several conversations that staff has had with developers as well as other city departments and internally about the potential of looking at other RDA project areas. Those possibilities range from extending existing project areas to creation of new project areas to amending the terms of existing project areas as well. And so we wanted to come and have a discussion with the board, put those out in front of you for a conversation and see if there is any direction or guidelines or concerns with any of these, so that as we reach out to those taxing entity partners, we have the ability to also talk to them about what potentially could be coming out the future. Obviously, State Street, 9 Line, and Northwest Quadrant are progressing. They have a timeline and a schedule attached to them by which we want to get those approved. However, some of the other ones, we don't need to necessarily take action right away, but they are ones that we wanted to put on everyone's radar as possibilities. So.
Danny, can you walk us through your thoughts on the Depot District, the Granary District, North Temple Viaduct,
Yep.
and the Grand Boulevards, just so that we have some context
Absolutely.
there?
Assuming that we are all aware of the first three, Northwest Quadrant, State Street, and 9 Line. The first one is the Depot District Extension. This one has started coming about in conversations both with developers as well as issues that the city and the agency would like to look at. First and foremost is the conversation of whether we would want to participate at all in the redevelopment of Gateway and the repositioning of that. One of the other priorities would be as we continue to work within Operation Rio Grande and regarding the homeless shelter, whether we would want to be able to be in a position with the redevelopment of that property or surrounding area. The majority of that surrounding area is property that the agency owns with Station Center. And so as we look to put those properties out for sale and development, we would also be in a position to participate anyway with that, as well as other properties that are still in the Depot District that are undeveloped, whether that's vacant property or something like the UTA property. Those are opportunities that would still exist. And overriding all of that are conversations regarding the potential for burying power lines. Right now, that's something that the RDA is really not able to have that conversation on because we don't have an ongoing funding source. And so if that was something that we wanted to be in a position to participate in, that's how the Depot District extension has kind of come about. With regard to granary, a lot of the same issues. This is an older project area that just never really developed to its potential for various reasons. But what that means is that there's still significant needs in terms of infrastructure. There's still significant property available for redevelopment that we could participate in. And then there's still the conversation of whether we would want to have that project area and be able to participate with the development of the fleet block. And so a lot of moving pieces there as well that we would just need to decide if we wanted to have the agency available to participate in. The next one is the North Temple Viaduct. This is a project area that was created for the primary purpose of servicing the debt related to rebuilding the North Temple Viaduct, and it included surrounding property. This has not necessarily started throwing off the amount of increment necessarily to service that debt, but we hope that that is going to happen in the short term. But as part, we've also been approached by property owners within that area who would like to redevelop one of the key blocks of that. And this project area, we are very limited that the tax increment can only be used for debt service. And so the conversation surrounding this is whether we wanted to participate in a large project there and have the opportunity to provide some tax increment reimbursement or incentives to the property owner that would hopefully actually start throwing off more money that would then in turn potentially pay the debt down sooner. So that is one that is just very preliminary, but we wanted to put it out there if it was something we wanted to explore to see if there was a cost benefit there for the city and the agency to do that. And then finally is a conversation of the Grand Boulevards. This is one that has been looked at in the past with the board in terms of potential project areas. This is an idea that dates back several years. I don't want to try to guess of how long it goes back, but the idea of revitalizing both 500 South and 600 South as they go on and off the freeway, taking a look at things like burying the power lines, improving infrastructure and beautification for that. That could hopefully provide a catalyst for having that development and higher density and really presenting a good gateway into the city as you come off the freeway. So that is one that has kind of come about as we've talked to property owners and developers looking at properties along those streets, and all the same issues are coming up in terms of infrastructure needs, burying power lines, and beautifying the area. So that's the rundown of how we came up with our list, and I think it's one that we would love to get any input on.
All right, it looks like we have a number of questions. Thank you,
Just
Danny.
look like you're ready to jump.
I'm going to go ahead and start at the end here, and then we'll move this direction. So let's start with Board Member Rogers, then Board Member Luke.
So I know that the Grand Boulevard has been a huge discussion with the Chamber as well as the Downtown Alliance. My question is, has there been discussion about turning them or looking at an SAA for those areas?
That has come up at least internally in our staff conversations. This is not one that we've really reached out to a lot of stakeholders yet, but that's something that we've identified as a potential, and the advantage of having a project area set up is then you could have a funding mechanism that could also be tied to that special assessment area.
For me, I think that that's the only way that I would feel comfortable moving forward is if we were able to do an SAA for those areas. Because you look at North Temple, it's too bad that we couldn't help educate the property owners along North Temple to have that as an SAA.
Thank you. Board Member Luke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one question that I have on most of these, you've talked about, the substantial infrastructure needs that we have. Have you, has the RDA worked with the streets and public services to look at the new study that was just completed?
No, we haven't gone into that level of detail in terms of putting a dollar amount or priority of needs, or really what the condition of those streets are outside of just what.
Okay, so Mr. Chair, one of the things that I would recommend is that we would have, or ask RDA staff to look at each of the project areas that we have, work with streets to go through that list and figure out what exactly the infrastructure needs are going to be, how those would be prioritized, because we're going to be having it's going to be tough enough for us to figure out how to fund all of the different infrastructure needs that we have in the city. But if the RDA, if you guys work at that as well and prioritize it, we would be able to use some RDA funds to help with our overall infrastructure needs.
Thank you, Board Member Luke. I agree with that statement, and I'd actually like to straw poll the board members. So I'm looking for support for whether we would be able to direct RDA staff to come back, take a look at the street study, cross-compare with RDA project areas, both existing and proposed. That way we can have a visual and an understanding of where crossover is. So if you're in favor of that.
Yeah, and if you could also ask that the RDA staff not only list but prioritize which they feel in those project areas would be the most beneficial to start with, so that if we don't have the money to pay for everything, which I know we will not, we will at least have an idea of what the interpretation is as to what the most important need is going to be.
Great. So in addition to comparing it with the street study, we will have RDA staff prioritize based on redevelopment priorities for the project area. So if I could get a thumbs up or thumbs down on that. All right, all 7 of us are in favor. Okay, moving on with comments on this item. Board Member Mendenhall, did you have something to add?
Yes. I'll start at the bottom with the Grand Boulevards. I think the difficulty here, and I will always speak frankly about billboards, is that I don't have any interest in deepening their need to be on our Grand Boulevards. And when we make investments to improve this area without removing billboards, we are further entrenching their existence in those places. Mm-hmm. So I think that's part of what's kept past administrations, when this conversation, has been around longer than our current administration. I think it's part of what's kept us from looking harder at the infrastructure and the other improvement needs that could happen there. That's my 2 cents. And I still feel that way, that until we're going to be able to uproot some billboards, I don't know that this rises above these other potential project areas.
Okay, thank you, Board Member Mendenhall. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
I do. Can I continue?
Yes, by all means.
Thanks. Do you want to? This is a long list of 7. Do you want to give us your prioritization or the opportunity? Maybe a scale of opportunities here. You mentioned some possible projects, but I don't feel like I have a good sense from staff yet.
I think obviously our priority are the 3 that are in motion right now. Those are ones we want to see through and have those get approved. Beyond that, I would say that the depot and the granary are ones that probably have more projects in hand right now. In terms of the impact and what we could do still to improve those areas. North Temple Viaduct one is one potentially that we may not necessarily need to do a project area. We could look at other tools to see if we could make that happen. Obviously a project area gives us the biggest bang for our buck, but that's something that we could reach out to the developers and see if we could find another way to do that. And then the Grand Boulevards is another one, following up on Board Member Rogers' comments. I think that's one that, again, we could look at other tools as well to make that happen, or identify what our goals are and then align what the funding source is with it. So those last 2, I think, are the ones that probably require the most amount of work still to look at what the needs are and the costs associated, and then we could come back and present a toolkit that maybe makes sense and that may not involve a project area. But the extensions probably have the most direct benefit right now.
And what kind of feedback would you need from the board today to get the staff moving on the depot and granary extensions in a time-sensitive
Yeah, that is at the will of the board. If those are things that you wanted us to start looking at in terms of exploring what those numbers would look like or what options are, we could certainly do that, or we could wait to have those conversations later.
My number one priority is that we get the top three in motion and that we do nothing that would stall their implementation. If it means that the depot and the granary extension work would be in any way a slow or drag on that implementation, then I'm not ready to do that.
I think that would be our intention as well, is not to slow those down at all.
Well,
Anything
then
else?
maybe I ask if we want to make a straw poll to request that staff bring back to the RDA board the depot district and granary district extensions at an appropriate time to begin work. And that may be before these other project areas are actually complete. I'm not sure what your workload.
It's heavy.
Yeah.
So I think that's good direction.
If I may jump in really quick, Danny, have you spoken to our existing taxing partners about the potential extension of granary or depot? Okay.
No,
so
that's why we wanted to have these conversations first, to see if that was something we wanted to be directed, even raise as a possibility.
now, in your mind, if the board were to agree that this is what we should be doing right now, the extension, what would the goal be there, Ness? Would it be another 25 years on the project area? Would it be just until we complete certain projects?
Yeah, I think you would get it a little bit more focused on projects. You would address your needs and what you'd be extending it for. I think you could be looking at doing a shorter term and or increasing the amount of the percentage of increment that flows to the taxing entity so that they can see a benefit sooner than later. And looking at what the best way to maximize that is, whether it's the term or the percentage.
Just for thought, looking at a map here, this colorful map, and this doesn't include the northwest quadrant, by the way. So much of our city is consumed by an existing or a proposed RDA project area. So, I mean, I almost wonder, would it be worthwhile to entertain a conversation about just making the whole city a project area? And what might that conversation look like? And how would we begin to even determine? I mean, just give me some feedback on that idea.
I think that's something that you could certainly entertain and would, you could look at in terms of what that would take, how you would structure that, and what the benefits would be in terms of versus the agency and the city, and making sure you're still targeting agency funds to what the directive is of how the agency was initially set up. But I think when you do look at that map, it starts speaking to the complication of having these project areas and the different parameters of funds and timelines and priorities. And if you're able to kind of take that in a more global and universal approach, there could be certainly some benefit to that if you could figure out a way to do that to where it's kind of a net impact.
Okay, I know Jennifer Bruno would like to contribute here, please.
Yeah, I think the concern would actually probably, this is where the hats of the city and RDA might be in competition, because I think the concern would be from the city side, is that would be the entire possibility of new growth revenue, flowing to the RDA, which, might be worth it from a policy perspective, but you just have to know, you'd have to go into that conversation knowing that you're dealing with both sides of your wallet, so to speak.
And I think there could be a way that you could either limit how much goes to the agency or how much of that new growth you capture and what the goals and objectives are. And I think if you went into it with the idea that you were trying to basically hold the city and the agency somewhat neutral in terms of where they are at now and where they could be.
That's a big idea. It's just worth considering. But I was looking here at the Depot District and the Granary District, and what divides them is the Grand Boulevards, right?
Yes.
So I wonder if there's an opportunity, instead of looking at it as three separate project areas, if we could maybe look at it as one new project area that includes areas of the depot, components of the Grand Boulevard, and certain properties within the granary that we want to target, because maybe we could just look at these puzzle pieces a little differently, I guess, is what all I'm suggesting.
Yeah, you can certainly do that as well.
Is there any other question from board members? Board Member Johnston, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll go the other direction on this one. How many staff do you have? How many staff do you have, Danny?
Well, we're understaffed right now, but we are a staff of 16 at full
16, and you have
capacity.
3 open positions?
We have 5 open
5?
positions right now.
So 21 total if you're fully staffed
No,
at this
that's
point?
5 of the 16 are open.
Oh, so you're down to 11 people right now.
Yes.
Good for you all. I struggle because I don't know how you allocate workload and how much you have on your plate.
Mhm.
My impression is that we, the royal we, can't do all this effectively. Is that, am I off base on that, saying that completely, or?
I think what we have on the table right now in terms of project areas and size and scope, yes, I would probably fairly say that we will be looking at needing more staff in addition to what we have now, and or getting very targeted in what our priorities and programs are that we carry out.
And I don't mean to minimize at all your staff's work.
No.
period. I mean,
My staff will be the first to tell you that they have a lot on their plates.
But it comes back to a resource allocation question for me. I don't know how we effectively do a great job on any one area unless we drop everything else for a few weeks like we have Northwest Quadrant and do it and let everything else slide. I mean, I don't know how we effectively pull out the mission of the RDA if we're going to keep diluting the resource. We need to, I think, as a board, discuss, are we willing to invest everything needed in all these, or do we need to prioritize things that are going to yield biggest bang for the buck in 5, 10 year, whatever increment we look at, and target those with the belief that generating return on investment can help the entire RDA in other areas. My concern, I guess, is looking at if Northwest Quadrant continues on, which is a question at this point on various levels, how much is that going to take for time, starting 2 new project areas, and then I'm looking at Depot, for instance, and the annual TI collected is $3.5 million, right?
In Depot?
Yeah.
Just about, yeah.
And in Granary, it's $400,000.
Yep.
For me, that's not even a question about return on investment right
Right.
now. I'm not saying anything wrong about Granary. We should develop it. I love it. It's next door to my neighborhood. But with limited resources, I think we need to prioritize certain things that are going to yield return right now, long term. So I would be hesitant to endorse a lot of increasing the project areas until we have a discussion about what are we going to focus on, or are we going to allocate more staff, more time, more money to do this out of what we're doing now.
And when we're looking at the granary, we do have the single property CRA tool
Correct.
that we could look at if we have the fleet block or another special property that we want to give some attention to. We have other tools in our tool belt, so.
And in my discussion, I'm thinking if I go through and look at North Temple Viaduct, for instance, how much staff time would it take to increase it by that amount to bring in a new development?
Not much.
Not much.
No.
But the return on the investment could be substantial in paying off that loan how much quicker?
Right.
Years?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of interest saved, and et cetera, right? If I look at, like I said, Depot, yeah, we're nowhere near where we thought we'd be, I'm guessing.
Right.
But yet, 2019 going to 2020, if the resource centers get online and that area changes dramatically, how much time is it going to take to sort of do what you need to do there?
That's a higher intensity of staff, depending on the scope of the projects and the number of them, yes.
I think for me in this discussion, it'd be helpful to have some idea about that as well, saying not all these are created equal in any way. Some of them may be very staff intensive with a lot of return on investment. Some of them may not, but they may be critical to a particular piece of the neighborhood that we need to look at. So that'd be helpful in sort of thinking about this for me. How much staff, how much time, what's the return on investment in these potentially? That's why I liked what you had here with Depot and Granary and North Temple Viaduct. So those would be helpful for me in discussing this. But then as a board, I think we need to also talk and have how much staff do you need if we're going to pull all these off at the level we anticipate.
We can look at that.
Thank you for your comments, Board Member Johnston. Anything else? What do you need from us?
I think we got it.
Okay.
Proceed with the 3. That's the top priority. And at some point in the future, we can touch back and start looking at when we want to bring the others to you.
Great. And you'll move forward with the cross comparison with the streets
Yes.
And we'll look
Yeah.
for that
We'll
at a
start
future
looking at that
agenda.
right away so that you can have that information as part of those other conversations.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Danny. All right, moving along, we are at item C5, the State Street Project Area Boundary Adjustment. Looks like we have Suze and Danny at the table.
We didn't
And-
think we had enough project area discussion for you today, so we thought we'd bring one more.
Well, this is at the request of some board members, so if you could kick it off with an update.
Yeah, thanks. During the December board meeting, there was a discussion about the 900 South off-ramp and whether or not it could be included in the State Street project area, either when West Temple Gateway expires or even prior to that. So our understanding of that idea is that the board wishes to preserve the options for redevelopment in the future should the configuration of the 900 South off-ramp change, or if there's an opportunity for a partnership with UDOT to help affect that configuration change. And the parcels, as I just stated, are currently in the West Temple Gateway project area, but Utah Code 17C does allow for parcels to be included in more than one project area if the board wants that to happen. So in the board memo that was submitted, there were the RDA, we looked at 3 potential options. Like Ben said earlier, these are just 3 options that we came up with. There are certainly more options out there, but these are options that we thought could be workable moving forward. So the first option is to make no changes to the boundary, but to include language in the project area plan that specifically states that the RDA has a priority of helping to affect change on that 900 South off-ramp, if possible, using the tool of using project area funds outside of the project area on public infrastructure if it benefits the project area. And that's something Utah Code 17C allows, as long as both the board and the city council agree that that funding does have a positive benefit for the project area. And I also was able to confirm with legal counsel that if we wanted to hire like a consultant as a first step in looking at a change like that, that could be done using either that same mechanism of having the board and city council agree, or possibly through some other more flexible funding mechanisms as well, even if those parcels aren't included in the project area. So I guess the pro of that option is that we can keep moving forward as planned. We're on track to bring a draft project area plan back to the board in March for the board meeting, and hopefully that would mean potential adoption of the project area plan in May, if everything went perfectly. But a con would be that the only tool that the RDA would have is to help fund that public infrastructure change, but no tools for actual redevelopment around that off-ramp if that off-ramp were to change, if it's not included in the project area. So I think that summarizes the first option. The second option, which is on the screen here, is to add a small area to the project area that's just in the direct vicinity of the 900 South off-ramp, which would allow the north-south connections for the through streets on Washington and those streets that go north-south between the two, or could go north-south if the off-ramp were not there. The pros for this would to allow all RDA tools to be used in these parcels, and preserves all redevelopment options for the future, and doesn't require any future action by a future board or a future city council. It does, on the con side, it does increase the project area slightly, but only by about 8.5 acres. And it would increase our timeline probably by about a month to be able to revise the maps that are associated with the project area plan, and also the public benefit analysis would have to be revised as well. And then the third option, I can try to pull it up if I can find it. Okay. So the third option would be to include about 3 blocks around the 900 South off-ramp, which is about 21 acres of land, but on the other hand, we would remove about 3 blocks. It actually would result in a net loss of 56 acres, the way I have proposed it here. At the time that I was putting together the board memo, technical difficulties were not allowing me to see how many acres were included and were being removed, but I have now discovered that it's about 56 acres if we were to remove all 3 of those areas. It has the same, pretty much the same pros and cons of option 2. It would still affect the timeline for the project area plan by about a month, but still preserves options in a greater amount of space around that 900 South off-ramp.
And just to clarify, on option 3, the areas that would be removed from the plan are tax exempt, is that correct?
Not entirely, but yes, they would. The county complex, which is the southernmost area to be removed, is completely tax exempt. Like that area entirely is. And it's, that's about 32 acres in and of itself, that southernmost area. And then the next one to the north is Slick and also Whittier Elementary, but there are a few just private parcels on there that are not tax exempt. And then the one that's farthest to the north, that's between 8th and 9th South and between 2nd and 3rd East, there isn't much on that block that's tax exempt, but it's mostly residential. Some of it's single family residential. There's a little bit of commercial on there, but not entirely tax exempt.
I'm going to open it up for discussion. Board Member Luke, go ahead.
So if we do adopt either of the either B or C, you think it'll only extend about a month?
I hope so. I might be being too optimistic, but that's sort of best case scenario.
I mean, that's really the only reason that I would oppose either of those, is because I think we've spent a lot of time on this, and I just want to start moving.
Right.
If it is extended a month or so, do we know of any projects that, that would be impacted because of that?
None that are on the table right now.
Okay. All right. So if you're not hearing any necessary opposition to it and you think you can move it forward quickly, I'm less opposed to it. I'm not as optimistic as my fellow board member Mendenhall is about removing the parcel, but I'm fine with it in the study. But if there would have been an impact on a project that we know of, then that would raise concern. But thank you.
Board Member Mendenhall.
Thank you for going through this process, and I think we learned a couple of interesting things about it. I want to be clear that I'm not counting on this off-ramp going away anytime soon. Come on, I'm just not that much of an optimist, but we did fund a study that's now to RFP with the Transportation Department to look at utilization, and UDOT is in those conversations, so it's not beyond the realm of possibility. And I also want to be clear that if this is to be included in the project area, I don't want it to, the potential removal of the off-ramp or the reorientation of the off-ramp to be a criteria of success of the project area by any means. It's really about what you said at the beginning, Suze, to be able to offer the tools of the RDA to the potential redevelopment of these acres of land that really divide this neighborhood right now. And also that there would be language to continue this conversation toward the possibility of reorientation or removal of the off-ramp. Because I think this project area plan and the West Temple Gateway project area plan recognizes that interruptions truly to the continuity, the fabric of the community that RDA project areas work to build, although unique to each project area, this type of incredibly long freeway off-ramp through a single-family neighborhood basically is not complementary to the work that we try to do, right? So I'm just looking to include it for the potential of tool use and include language around continuing the conversation toward its potential, not that the success of this area hinges on the removal of this off-ramp.
And just to clarify, that would be language to include that says continuing that conversation even beyond the expiration of the project area? Is that what you were thinking? Or just kind of language that says this is a priority for us and we want to keep moving forward with?
Yes, that's what I was thinking, unless
Okay.
anybody else wants to say we want to
Okay.
continue this in perpetuity for 50 years.
Maybe there's a way, and I don't know the language, the exact language, but I think the intent is that, kind of like you said, you don't expect it to be completed prior to, completed meaning like removed or something, prior to the expiration of the project area, but that the intent is to, in including it, the intent is to keep the conversation moving. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
And I wondered if there's an option between options 2 and 3, because it does make sense to me as we cut out the ballpark from, there's a belly button on this project area,
Yeah.
that we would also cut out these tax exempt properties, especially the county complex, which is completely tax exempt.
Once I found out what the acreage was on all of these, that was kind of my exact thought too, was that maybe we could consider just cutting out that county piece, and it just eliminates all of the tax exempt, and maybe leaving the others in. I don't know how important it is to like Salt Lake Community College or Whittier Elementary that they're actually within the project area boundaries. So
What benefit is there?
maybe
to them?
I don't know that there really is, other than something psychological.
Well, and I think it now, the way we understand it now, I think it facilitates spending money on the property. So just because you don't collect money from the property doesn't mean you can't spend money on the property. And as RDA staff pointed out, you can spend money adjacent to project areas if you think that it benefits the project area. But if you know that you might want to eventually, I don't know, make an improvement for the community at Whittier Elementary, like maybe there's a way, maybe you consider leaving it in the project area. But I can't imagine, maybe I'm not thinking broadly enough, but I can't imagine a scenario where the RDA would spend money on the county complex to improve it somehow. I think that you would look for a partnership with the county probably to do that. So, whereas Whittier Elementary is maybe a different animal that, I don't know. And Slicks, so sort of a different animal than the county, but.
Yeah, the only two things that come to mind of what you would immediately see as a need to spend funds is if for some reason you thought that those would transform into something else, which hopefully wouldn't happen because those are uses, or depending on how you draw the boundaries of the project area, typically we try to include the street. And so if you ever had any street improvements or curb gut or sidewalk improvements.
We just did.
Do you
Well, then
guys
that's
know
one less
this?
thing.
We just did this at Whittier.
But those are
Yeah.
things you could look at spending funds on, outside of just the specific property itself.
In the theme of transparency, I am a parent at Whittier, as maybe someone at your desk is also. I won't name anyone. So I feel bad saying, let's cut Whittier out of here, but I desperately want to be mindful of the most trim profile we can cut for this project area.
Yeah.
It's a whale of a
Mhm.
size, and I am willing to trade the 9th South off-ramp for Whittier if I have to. Okay, I said it, and I'll be quiet.
Okay,
So sorry. Oh,
by all means, please.
just to clarify, then would you be you would want to cut all 3 of these areas, or would you only be wanting to cut the southern 2, Salt Lake Community College and the county?
I actually am satisfied to go with option 2's size of the off-ramp.
'Kay.
And cut the
Or
county
other direction?
complex, which is still a net loss of acreage, right?
It would be, yeah.
Because you're at 8.5 to add that small off-ramp portion,
Mm-hmm.
and it's 36, did you say?
I think it's 32. Yeah, about
32.
32 and a half
So,
to cut the
to
county.
my peers, how do you feel about that? If we cut the corner off with the county? and add the smaller off-ramp portion.
Board Member Wharton, go ahead, please.
The county complex that we're talking about does include one of the city housing authorities
I think it's county.
properties, right?
It
No,
probably, it might,
one of them is city and one is county.
yes, okay.
So
There
would we-
is a housing project there.
Yeah. So wouldn't we want to, no, I think it's the Friendly Neighborhood Senior Center. Yes. So is there any benefit to keeping that in because it's got the city, because that is a city housing authority site?
If you anticipate that that's going to stay housing, then you don't necessarily need to incorporate it because you can always spend housing funds outside of a project area. So unless you thought that that was going to turn into something other than housing, then you'd want it in the project area. But if we think it's going to be housing, then we can always spend those funds citywide.
Thank you, Danny. Anything to offer, Board Member Johnston? Go ahead.
Sure. We had this conversation a while back, but why the particular blocks on the north end, the residential ones that are still included in number 2, but not in number 3?
Again, that would go back to just a clean line, number 1, and number 2,
Yeah.
trading residential property primarily that we can still participate in even if it's not in a project area with property around the off-ramp that.
It's just odd to me that we would have that cut out for one particular residential block, and not for anything else sort of contingent to it.
Do you mean the block
Yeah,
between 8th and 9th
Yeah.
South and 2nd and 3rd East? Yeah, it's kind of an awkward thing. Originally, the 3 blocks to the north of it were also included in the State Street area, but then we determined that they were in Central City, so we took them out, and that 4th is just kind of a remnant from that.
Mm-hmm.
And to be perfectly honest, I don't totally remember exactly how those were included in the first place. It was like an evolution of a conversation among board members that created that boundary in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't recall exactly why those blocks seemed important to include at the time.
Sure.
I don't know if that's something I can try to find out.
I would endorse personally the hybrid between 2 and 3, where you have 2's 9th South off-ramp size, but then 3's elimination of those 3 properties to the east of State.
Okay. So just combine both of those options.
Yeah.
Well, sort of.
The size of the new 9th South off-ramp of 2 with
Yeah,
the
add
elimination.
8.5, but remove, what is it, like 77 acres?
If I may jump in here, I'm hearing a lot of support for the off-ramp boundary in option number 2. And I would just like to have everybody look at option number 3, which is on the screen here, and the red boundary there for the off-ramp includes, I think, all of current West Temple Gateway project area. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Well, right in the middle of that Utah-shaped boundary is Henry's Dry Cleaners, which we're walking away from the West Temple Gateway project area with that project or that property completely unaddressed. I know that some private folks have done I think they've done phase 1 and phase 2 environmental work on this, and have found that, the whole block between 2nd West and 3rd West has been contaminated. And so I can't imagine a critical corner like this in our city, in a blossoming neighborhood. The dry cleaner is not going to be addressed, in my opinion, on its own. It's going to need the public help at some point down the road. So I would make the case for the larger property or the larger boundary, just so that we can include the cleanup as one of our goals in this project area, and have all the tools and resources available to do that. But I'm also not married to it, but I do think that we'd be missing an opportunity not to at least talk about that here. And then I'm very flexible on the rest of the boundaries, so I don't have an emotional attachment to any of those necessarily. So I just wanted to toss that out to the board for a topic of conversation, if you don't mind entertaining me. Board Member Mendenhall, please.
I absolutely am warm to that. I think you're right that that kind of a significant PCB cleanup is going to take some city assistance and partnerships, and the RDA could be a good tool for that when that private property owner is ready to come to the table with us. I think I was trying to be too pragmatic, and I'm not very good at that most of the time anyway. So I would support the larger boundary, especially even though it looks big. Suze, you said it's
Yeah.
22 acres or so.
Yeah, it's almost 22 acres.
Yeah, so if we remove the other three identified, mostly tax exempt or thumb projects, then we're still in the negative
Yes.
by
Yep,
50-ish acres.
that would be option 3, right? And
Yeah.
that would still be a net loss of about 56 acres, yeah.
Board Member Wharton, please.
Just wanted to point out, as I'm looking at this map and the one in the last presentation, it definitely goes over to Second East, right? Because in the presentation before of all the RDA areas, you having that map stopping at State Street for most of the properties on State, or between 9th South and 15th South. It stops at State Street.
Oh,
Yeah.
Then we need to
that
update
map
that.
is, sometimes has a few issues.
Okay, so it definitely goes over to Second East.
It does definitely
Okay.
go over to Second East.
Okay,
Yeah.
and then, okay. I think that's it. That was my-
You just wanted to clarify
That was my clarification. I was like, we're definitely not including half of State Street, right?
Board Member Johnston.
Right, all of State Street, all the way over to Second East, right, yeah. Sorry, I apologize for that discrepancy on that.
The Henry's drag cleaning thing is a compelling argument. I understand. I also understand that this is still over 700 acres. And we need to have a discussion about what the priority areas are going to be, because we can't do everything, and maybe that comes later on. But we can very easily come back and find project after project after project and have to sort of figure out what we're going to do. Because originally everything, if I remember it, everything west of the core Straight Street thing was based on the Humboldt's Resource Center.
Yeah.
Everything over there was for that, period. So the creep, a little bit, sort of the creeping of other things come in, I want to be aware of that as we get into this. So we're not expecting to pull in everything else we can in that sort of neighborhood, so to speak. So I'm not sort of getting down on the Henrys, because it's true, it's a problem. It's right in the core of that. And we may find a lot of those through this area, and set ourselves up to say, what can we actually do here?
Okay. Anything else to contribute, board members? In that case, I would like to, yeah, by all means.
So can you tell me why Henry's wouldn't be included as part of the West Gate, or West Temple Gateway?
It would be, but that project area expires this year.
Oh, okay, that's right. Sorry. Thanks.
I'd like to get a straw poll on board members' appetite for moving forward with option 3. So if I could get thumbs up or thumbs down on that, or modification to it.
Could we do a modification with the county piece out?
Yeah, so I'm straw polling map number 3 with the
That would keep
and
everything out, right?
it would
It
remove the
it would
county, the
remove
community college,
community
and that
college.
little
Okay.
block,
Loss of 56 acres.
and it would
Okay.
decrease it by 56. Yeah. So, Amy Fowler, go ahead.
Sorry, before we do that, didn't Councilmember Johnston bring up that we were, or somebody did, of how that conversation included that little residential area, and that we were going to come back and find out why that little residential area was originally included in this CRA, in this particular project area? Did I not hear that correctly?
I think yes, you heard that correctly. And I think you were talking about the block between 8th and 9th South and 2nd and 3rd East. And I was informed that that was included to target older office buildings on 2nd East, which maybe could still be potentially targeted,
the
included,
West side.
if they were on the west side, but not if they were on the east side.
So how many acres is that? Is that 8 acres, 10 acres?
That piece is 8.61 acres.
So even if we excluded the community college property and the county property, but included that, we would still be at a net decrease
Yeah, you'd
in
be at about
project area
69
size.
acres that you'd be taking out,
I mean,
even if you left that in.
if you guys want to talk about this, go ahead.
I was just, I knew there had been
Right, and I
a
didn't answer.
follow-up question
Yeah,
to
I didn't
that,
answer
so
the
I just
question,
wanted to
so
make sure. Okay.
that's reasonable at the time.
And can I get some clarity on the Whittier Slick portion that I believe Kensington is the road on the north side of that property?
The north side of Slick, is that right?
Yeah, where the McDonald's is on the corner. I guess there's single-family homes in there between the exit for the community college and McDonald's, and also on on the north side of that street. So I just want to get clarity that it's the south side of Kensington that'd be cut out.
Okay.
Is that the case? I'm asking a question.
Oh, that's a
actually.
question. That was my intention with drawing that box, but it's hard. It's hard to see exactly where those
Is it possible
streets
to
are.
include the single-family homes that?
I think so. Those single-family homes are
You're talking the ones just north of Whittier?
just north of Slick and Whittier.
North of Slick. So Whittier, I'm talking west of Second East.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you can certainly draw the line that way along that property line.
Along the property line rather than along the street
Mm-hmm.
itself.
So it cuts out, it includes the
Includes the homes and the businesses, but does not include the slick
tax
property.
exempt properties, right? So that we're more surgical about removing the tax exempt
Mhm.
properties.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then to be clear, we're taking out the Whittier piece or leaving that in?
I'm okay with taking it out.
So can we do a straw poll on this? Aaron, would you mind rephrasing what your request was to Suze and Danny?
Yes, that the Salt Lake Community College and Whittier tax exempt properties be removed from the project area, and that the boundary be drawn to include business and residential properties adjacent to the schools. I was just saying what I thought Derek wanted me to
That's exactly
address.
So I think it's to be determined.
Need to do more.
I would be, I mean, I know it's a big sprawling project area, but if the previous board decided that they wanted to keep this block here between 8th and 9th South and 2nd and 3rd East in for some reason, maybe we keep that in, exempt the two bottom properties with the exception of the businesses and residential properties adjacent to the elementary school, and then include, and Slick, and then include the larger parcel right there, the one that's on the map. So option number 3. So that's a little clunky, but does everybody understand what I was saying?
I think
Yeah, I think
Okay.
so. And it sounds like the project area will still extend to 300 East on its easternmost little thumb jogs,
Yes.
right? If we did that?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Can we straw poll that, or do you want to comment on it beforehand? Okay.
What can I say? Sorry, one other thing. It sounds like from information I'm getting from others that the office buildings that we were really intending to target along 2nd East, where that little thumb is to the north, were farther to the north of this particular block. So I am not sure that this particular block is entirely necessary for the project area, but it's also fine to leave it in if, we think that it can't hurt or having that information. We were almost done.
So I would really like to get some clarity and some direction forward here today, but it sounds like we might need to have you come back with some information on this block in particular. No? Okay. So
I'd
does-
rather just leave it in, honestly, if we're not sure, because it's only 8 acres, 8.5 acres. And
So in that case, I am asking for a straw poll to gauge the temperature, to see who's interested in moving forward with option 3, excuse me, with the exception of most of the community college block and all of the Salt Lake County block, but leaving in business and residential properties adjacent to the schools.
Do we need to move adoption of the resolution, though, with those details today?
yeah, we do have a resolution, and I believe it's craftily worded so that all we have to do is include a map showing the changes that are attached to it. So I can adjust this map according to this discussion, and then it can be attached to that resolution.
So in that
That
case,
approved resolution.
my proposal stands, and so I'm looking for a motion, I suppose, from somebody else who's willing to offer that to me.
Okay, I'll do it. I move that the board adopt a resolution authorizing the adjustment of the community reinvestment area boundary for the proposed State Street project area per our discussion.
Okay. That works for me.
It's been moved by Board Member Mendenhall and a second by Vice Chair Fowler. Any further discussion on this?
Can you clarify again for me?
Sure.
In this discussion now, we are excluding the county office block, essentially. Salt Lake Community College and Whittier Elementary, but not Kensington. And we are leaving in the block between 8th and 9th South, between 2nd and 3rd East.
Exactly.
And the overall acreage now, anybody tallying this on the way?
We've not been telling that,
That's
by the way.
math.
It doesn't really matter at this point, let's be honest.
We're adding
a lot of
21.61 acres
Yeah.
and removing probably close to 64 acres. I don't actually know what those other parcels add up to, but
Right.
Can I make a friendly amendment to Councilmember Mendenhall's, or Board Member Mendenhall's motion?
I'm open to that.
Thank you. If we're going to include the housing from the Slick block, I would like to include the housing on the Salt Lake County government block too.
Okay.
We do that. So we cut out the office buildings, we keep the residents in, and we keep the residents in around the Slick block as well, but we cut out the schools.
the tax exempt stuff, yeah, the school.
Can you just have a point of clarification for me? The housing that he's talking about for Salt Lake County that Board Member Wharton is talking about is tax exempt, right?
It, according to the data that I was looking at, everything in that area was tax exempt.
It is
which
tax
would include
exempt.
that.
And then
It
the
is,
housing around Salt Lake Community College is not tax exempt, is that correct?
That's correct. There are parcels around community college that are not tax exempt.
The housing on the county block is 3.16 acres, if it's helpful.
And is that jointly owned by the county and the city housing authority?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have a motion that's been seconded, and then I have a friendly amendment to the original motion, but no second.
Mhm.
Okay. And then, in that case, looks like we're moving forward with the original motion as laid out.
All right.
Okay, I'll roll call this, starting with District 1.
Yes.
District. I'm a yes.
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 And that one carries unanimously. Suze, would you mind emailing City Council staff once you get that map redrawn?
Yeah, that's
That-
fine. And just to clarify, we did not do the amendment. We're not including the housing that's tax exempt by the
Correct.
county complex. Okay, perfect. Yes, I will email that map as soon as I get it redrawn to attach to the amendment, or to the, resolution.
Resolution, fabulous. Is there anything else that you need from us on this item today?
No, this is great.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you for all your work on this.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, moving along, we are at item C6, report and announcement from the executive director. Mayor Biskupski, do you have anything to offer today? Oh, you're welcome. Item C7, report and announcement from the RDA staff. Danny?
The only other item I have is following up on Board Members Johnson's comment regarding staffing, just to clarify that. We do have 5 positions right now that are open. We have our deputy director position, 2 project coordinator / project manager positions. And then we have received over the past week, both Luis Garcia has turned in her 2 weeks. She has taken a position with the Streets Department, as well as Crayola Berger, who is our accountant, who is taking a position in the Finance Department, Treasurer's Office as a financial analyst. So we're sorry to be losing both of them. Lou's been with us just over 2 years. Crayola has been with us 18 years. And so that is a huge chunk of institutional knowledge that we're losing. Fortunately, she is staying in the building, so we have told her that we will be having regular lunches with her to continue the brain dump of information that she holds, and then make sure that we're trying to transition as smoothly as possible. So all of those positions have been posted and or closed and received resumes, so we're in the process of evaluating those and trying to fill them as soon as possible.
Can I ask, can we have some real talk for a second? On the record. I'm just curious, so that will put you at 7 positions, 7 vacant positions?
11.
Oh.
We have a total of 16 positions on our staffing document, and 5 of them now will be open.
And 5 will, okay, 5 in total, gotcha. Is there anything that the board can do to make these
We're open Monday
jobs
through
more
Friday from 8 to
attractive, or-
5. If anyone would like to come in and volunteer, we're willing to have help. No, if you know of any qualified applicants, please absolutely direct them to the postings, and we would love to have that. And we're going to just try to get people in those positions as soon as possible.
Okay, and I think I'd just like to echo Board Member Johnston. We support you. We want you to be successful, and we know you can't be as successful as possible without having a full staff. So let us know if you need anything from us, okay?
Absolutely. We will do
Mr.
that.
Chair,
Yes,
may I have a moment
please.
to make a comment that your staff has been exceptional in giving us the tools that we need to do the emergency business that we've been doing, that we've been about lately around the Northwest Quadrant. Last week, our city council rearranged its schedule to have robust discussions around the Northwest Quadrant, and leading up to that and following that, it's really been your staff that has created, given us the context to have details, to have the formation of plans, and I am so grateful for your staff and the work that you
Thank you.
all have put in. So my many thanks to all of you and the extra hours and brain power that you guys rendered.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, but I don't
We
think
appreciate
it's
that,
done
and
either.
To your comments, I think the only thing we probably would ask for is patience as we go through, and we've obviously had to adjust some priorities and schedules for projects we'd like to be doing, and then obviously headed into budget season. It's not a good time to be losing someone with that knowledge, and so we will get through that and give us a little bit of leeway if we need to get some information that we're not prepared to speak to. So.
Is there anything
Then
else
we have
you'd
one
like-
other
oh,
item that we need to address. We have been asked that as part of our reports, one of the things that would help us tremendously is if the board were willing to consider setting the public hearing date for both the Northwest Quadrant amended plan, as well as potentially, if we can get everything put together in time, the Stadler single property CRA plan. And so the reason Tammy came back up here, she has some language, if you would so entertain that motion and direction, so that we could get those on the agenda and keep those projects moving according to schedule. So.
Right, and I think Danny did a good job at expressing the language. We just need a straw poll potentially setting those dates, definitely for the CRA Northwest Quadrant amendment, and possibly for Stadler Rel on March 20th.
March 20th, okay.
And the other piece of information that the recorder's office usually needs to set the date, and I'm looking back, is the time, right? So it would be during the regular business session of the RDA. So if you could add 2 p.m. to whatever language you have. 2 p.m. on March 20th.
And so I need a motion for that, is that right? Okay. Is somebody willing to offer a motion?
I don't know that I'll get it right, but I move that we set the CRA Northwest Quadrant Amendment and the Stoddard Single Property CRA to a public hearing date. Is that what we're doing, is a public hearing on March 20th at 2? Is that accurate?
Yes. It's been moved by Board Vice Chair Fowler and seconded by Board Member Rogers. Any discussion from the board members on this? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
There you go.
Great.
Easy
Thank
peasy.
you for that.
All right, board, is there any questions, comments, concerns on the written briefings? Item D. Okay. And do I? All right, and now we're on to item E, which will be the consent agenda. I look for a motion to adopt.
So moved.
It's been moved by Board Member Luke and seconded by Board Member Mendenhall. All those in favor? That motion carries, and we are adjourned.